15. Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your forefathers, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the river and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the river and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. When I brought your fathers out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. Then you lived in the desert for a long time. I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them from before you, and you took possession of their land. When Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab, prepared to fight against Israel, he sent for Balaam, son of Beor, to put a curse on you. But I would not listen to Balaam, so he blessed you again and again, and I delivered you out of his hand. Then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did also the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites. But I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you, also the 2 Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow. So I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live in them, and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your forefathers worshipped beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your forefathers served beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." The word of the Lord. Long series of names and events. This doesn't mean much to us, right? We recognize a few names. We've talked about Abraham and Moses. We know Isaac's story, and Jacob and Esau. But Balak, I've taken classes on all these guys, and I still have to look them up most of the time. And then, as though it's not confusing enough to keep track of just the people of Israel, we have the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites, and I promise you I'm completely guessing on how to pronounce those names. So, why are we reading this list of names and events when they don't mean all that much to us today? First of all, this historical account is important to us because it's important to Israel. Each of those names and places and battles meant something to each person in the crowds that Joseph spoke to. Their individual and collective histories were wrapped up in these stories, to the point that Joseph doesn't even need to give details. The people have heard these stories since birth. They are stories that have formed their identity, and they have become a part of them. So Joseph can toss out a name, and you can imagine the whole crowd nodding along as he rattles off this list. And meanwhile, we're like, Beor, who was that guy again? But they have this intimate knowledge of every story listed here. And Joseph isn't repeating these names for our sake. So what is the goal? If they know it all already, why repeat this whole list of events before he gets to the meaty stuff? This is a common thread throughout the Old Testament. We've heard over the last several weeks about the covenant with Abraham and the covenant with Moses. And each time there's this formula that begins by listing out the many things that God has done for the people. So these stories are not just stories. They are God's half of the covenant, the evidence of God's faithfulness. Over and over again, despite the people's failure to live up to their promises, God delivers them from battles they could not hope to win alone. God saves them from their bad decisions, reels them back in, to return them on the path God has had them on all along. And then, to top it all off, this beautiful and fruitful land just falls into their lap. Joshua says, I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities which you had not built, and you have lived in them. You are eating in vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant. In this, he's repeating a passage from Deuteronomy. It's almost verbatim, where God promises great and splendid cities which you did not build, and houses full of all good things which you did not fill, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you eat and are satisfied. And this passage in Deuteronomy comes just moments after the Ten Commandments are given, which Peter spoke about last week. It's almost like there's a connection they're supposed to make. Joshua is throwing it in their faces a little bit. Those commandments, which can be summed up as the rules for loving God and loving our neighbor, those are still in effect, so they better be paying attention. It's not so obvious to us, but these people know. They have received exactly what they were promised years ago when they were still wandering in the wilderness. And that means that now it's their turn. They have to fulfill their end of the bargain. It's like this. Imagine somebody just gave you a house. Not even just a house, they give you a mansion. It's enormous, gorgeous, it's got a huge yard, it's beautifully furnished and decorated, and everything you could ever need or want is right there. And then on top of that, you walk into the dining room and find that someone has prepared a giant feast, a luxurious feast, perfectly cooked steak and decadent desserts, served on the good china and with the kind of really good wine that I know I'll probably never be able to afford. You didn't do anything to deserve this. In fact, you haven't been all that great to the person who did this for you. Perhaps they have loved you and supported you, despite the fact that you have very often taken them for granted. All along your whole life, they have worked tirelessly for you, and you have kind of ignored how much they have done for you. So what could you possibly do in the face of such unbelievable kindness? With the knowledge that you are unworthy of this abundant generosity. This isn't something that you can just repay, now with objects or with words or anything else you've got to offer. So what do you do? In this situation, here is what Joseph calls the people to do. To fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. What does that even mean? Practically, what does that look like? I am not sure I know what to do with the word faithfulness. It's a lovely word, and it's very meaningful, but it's a bit vague, at least for me. Another translation I found, and I think it's a bit closer to the real meaning, it says to serve the Lord in sincerity and truth. And that's something I can work with. This kind of generosity, this kind of grace. It certainly inspires sincerity, right? It inspires gratefulness. So Joshua gives the people options. They don't have to respond with gratitude for what they've received. Choose for yourself today whom you will serve. He commands them to choose and to do it fast. They have to decide today, right now, that they will serve God with sincerity, with gratitude. God has already chosen. That is immensely clear. And now it's up to the people to choose God back. Gratitude is one of those things that we want to just come naturally to us. But in order for it to come naturally, we have to work for it. We have to choose it. We have to practice gratitude. That sounds strange to us, to practice something that seems like it would be an inherent part of our personality. But it's been proven over and over by psychological studies. There's a psych professor at the University of Michigan who gives an unusual homework assignment to his students. He asks them to write a letter of gratitude, sort of like a belated thank you note, to someone in their life. According to the professor, 100% of the time, his students felt more grateful and happier in general after writing a letter. It makes sense. The more time we spend considering the things we're grateful for, the more grateful we will become, and the more we will develop a perspective of gratitude. This is what happened to the Israelites. When they spent more time thinking about and talking about the things that they had received, they were more able and willing to serve God. Over time, though, their thankfulness faded, and they again began to take God's goodness for granted. Who knew you could find evidence for psychological truth in the Bible? I can relate. I know this very well because there was a time in my life when I was great at this. I had developed a sense of gratitude. I think I had a bit of an advantage because I didn't grow up in the church. When I came to Christ, there was no way that I could take that kind of love for granted. But all it takes is time for complacency to come. I got distracted, I got frustrated, and I gradually forgot how to be grateful. I didn't even notice. But a few weeks ago, I spent a weekend at a monastery in upstate New York, hoping to kind of recenter myself at the beginning of the new school year. It's this incredibly beautiful place on the Hudson River. And as I found myself feeling overwhelmed by gratitude for the opportunity to be there, I simultaneously realized that somewhere along the way, in my daily life, I had lost the spirit of gratitude that I once had. It wasn't even anything particular that caused it, but it had happened so slowly that I didn't even know. So coming back from the monastery, I realized that I need to choose gratitude. I have to make a conscious and intentional decision to be thankful. It can be so hard to look around the world and see constant injustice and suffering on the news, in our own neighborhoods, and in the pain of our family and friends. But we need to find a way to have a promised land perspective, even when we are walking in the wilderness. If we choose to be grateful to God in our triumphant moments, we will hold on to gratitude, even when we can't help but moment. It takes a conscious choice and it takes discipline, but that choice is what we are called to when we serve God. So let's choose gratitude together. Amen.